Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Moore. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I was just thinking about how incredibly unlikely this weekend's game would have seemed just 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago, 2023, Ohio State opened the 2023 season on the road at Indiana, and everyone kind of went, oh, well, if you had to open on the road against a Big Ten team, this is exactly the one you'd want to do it against because it's close to home and it's, they're not going to be any good, and, their coach is about to get fired, and, boy, this is, and Ohio State won by 20 points, and everyone kind of went, boy, that was a really uninspiring road win against Indiana. And here we are 2 years later, Tony, and Ohio State football still has more or less the same expectations. Indiana, just a little different than where things were just a couple of years ago.
A smidge different than the way things were a few years back, although we can go back to the 2017 season opener when Indiana threw for 420 yards against an Ohio State defense that we found out that day was going to be pretty questionable. And hey, maybe not the best defense in the world. If Indiana went 42 of 68 that day for 420 yards. If Fernando Mendoza in this game throws 68 times, Tom, is that good for Indiana or is that bad for Indiana?
Boy, that's a fantastic question. I would say that's probably, outside of the fact that 68 plays in and of itself would be quite a number of plays. That probably is you're digging out of an enormous hole because they want to run the ball, and if it's close, they're going to want to run the ball. If Fernando Mendoza throws 50 passes, that's probably very bad for Indiana, I would think, because that means you're playing to keep the pedal down. And you're playing to, in a game where presumably you need to keep up with someone. You're not throwing the ball if you're up 4 touchdowns, probably. Although Kurt Cignetti has done it before. So, but generally, a lot of the games they've won by a lot of points have been games where they've run the ball really, really well, and they've had a bunch of 50-yard runs. So, I would say that's probably a lot of long extended drives for Indiana. And you're not averaging 17 yards of completion if you're throwing it 50 times. If he averages 17 yards of completion and throws it 50 times, I'm going to change my answer to that's a good thing for Indiana. But I'm going to say 50 attempts or more for Indiana, probably not great for their likelihood of winning.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's fair. That's your opinion. We do not expect that in this one. 68 plays on offense is probably pushing it at this rate, but we are here today to talk about the 5 matchups that will decide this game. And last week when I started this against Michigan, when I started the show and we did the 5 matchups that would decide the Michigan game, I went with Matt Patricia versus Bryce Underwood. Little did I know Bryce Underwood was also talking the same thing about, it's going to be me versus Matt Patricia. Did not go well for Bryce Underwood. Spoiler alert. This week I'm going to start with the same thing. And it's Matt Patricia for me against Fernando Mendoza. But Fernando Mendoza, far from a true freshman quarterback, he's been a multi-year starter. This is going to be a much different test for Matt Patricia and his defense, but one that I think Matt Patricia is viewing this as a higher level course as well. He's not going into last week's game against Bryce Underwood thinking I need, 700 level astronomy basically to try and fool this guy. This week though, he has to crank it up a notch and be a little bit more deceptive and effective. And what are you dialing up? Where is it coming from? So I think this matchup, if Fernando Mendoza can handle it, that's a really, really good sign for Indiana's chances in this game.
Yeah, I think this is one where, Matt Patricia's going to have a lot of stuff that he has not shown a ton of, and he's going to be mixing and matching coverages like crazy would be my expectation. I think if, I would expect a load of penny front from Ohio State against sort of a largely zone-based Indiana run game, which then you can do all sorts of fun and creative stuff behind that. If the front 5 can really take care of the run game mostly by themselves, then you can do all sorts of crazy stuff behind that. And we've also seen, they'll show pressure with all 5 of those guys, and 2 of them will back out. Which 2? I don't know. It's an exciting mystery. We'll all find out together about half a second after the snap. This is going to be a much more balanced battle between these 2 guys, where it's a video game, and beating true freshman Bryce Underwood, that was level 1. Okay, now you're we've gone through the little tubes in Super Mario, and now we're on level like 5, and Fernando Mendoza, things are going to be a lot harder here in World 5-1 against Fernando Mendoza. If he can, if Matt Patricia can bait Fernando Mendoza into 2 turnovers, Ohio State probably wins this game. Unless Ohio State has a similarly disastrous run on offense. If Ohio State can force a couple turnovers, they probably win this game. If Ohio State can limit Indiana's run game, they probably win this game. If Ohio State can just sort of keep Indiana from being able to hit the ball down, hit those big shots downfield, and make them sort of work methodically down the field, where you got to, you can get a touchdown, but you're going to have to get 5 first downs before you get down there. Can you win 5 separate sets of 3 downs or 4 downs? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But, this is going to be much more of a fair fight between quarterback and coordinator than we had last week. All right, so we're going to start, Tony, for me, where it all begins, basically right where the football starts on every play. I got to talk about Caden McDonald against sort of the interior of the Indiana defensive line. McDonald has been a super, super impactful player, and we talked about him a bunch last week because Michigan is running a bunch of zone stuff, and if you can get in and disrupt stuff in the backfield, that completely blows up a zone-based run scheme. And there's a possibility that Caden McDonald might be able to do that again this week. Pat Coogan, the center for Indiana, former Notre Dame player. You saw him in the national championship game last year. He has been really solid. He's been very good for Indiana this year. Bray Lynch, the right guard, that's a guy that we've talked about a bunch this week, and not necessarily always in glowing terms. That's a matchup where if it ends up with Bray Lynch has to block Caden McDonald, I'm not sure that's a winning matchup for Indiana. And if Caden McDonald's in the backfield, I'm not sure that's so great for Indiana's run game. And if Indiana's run game isn't great, I'm not sure that's so great for Indiana's pass game because it's so RPO heavy. So I think, you look at the pass game and it's like, will Fernando Mendoza and Elijah Surratt be able to beat Jermaine Matthews? It's like, I think that question starts, you got to rewind the film about a second and a half to what happened right after the ball was snapped, and what did Caden McDonald do, and where did he get? Because I think that might be a matchup that goes a long, long way towards determining what happens on a play, even if it's not a play where Caden McDonald ends up on the stat sheet at all.
And Caden McDonald is on the stat sheet quite a bit. He is now tied for 4th on the team in tackles with 52. Tied with his childhood football teammate, Caleb Downs, All-American safety, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, Caleb Downs. Caden McDonald, of course, the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year. Only Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese have more assisted tackles than Caden McDonald on this team. And he's 1 tackle away from being tied for 3rd on the team in tackles with Caden Curry, who is also having a fantastic season. I think you're seeing Caden McDonald now pop up on mock drafts, and he's going to have an advantage, I think, every single time he's on the field for the rest of the year, especially this one where he can impact the interior as much as he does. And he can do it against the pass, against the rush, where he's a complete nose tackle. He can get into the backfield, 8 tackles for loss on the season, and that's only the ones where he landed. That's not the ones where he pressured the quarterback or forced a running back into the waiting arms of somebody like Caden Curry. And I guess we could just move to the next matchup, which is, we'll just group them all together. The Ohio State defensive ends, Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, against the Indiana tackles, and left tackle Carter Smith, right tackle Khalil Benson, which I think this is going to be Carter Smith's, I'd say, the best battle he's had since probably Oregon. And, by all accounts, that went pretty well for him. We've talked a lot about Khalil Benson at right tackle and how that's kind of the weak spot. That's, as you said, I think one of the shows previously, that's, you'll see Caden Curry a lot on the right side of that offensive line, and he's very effective. He's very, very effective against the pass, against the run. He is a complete defender, as evidenced by his 53 tackles on the season, which are third on the team. And then Kenyatta Jackson has just been turning it on more and more as a pass rusher, and also as a run defender. He had 2 tackles for loss against Michigan. Right now, these two are coming along at the exact perfect time, and I'm not even talking about Arvell Reese on the edge yet. We're just talking about these 2 defensive ends against the 2 offensive tackles. If Carter Smith can't hold up, then boy, this could be a day where Fernando Mendoza is going to have to make a lot of plays with his legs, which he is also very capable of doing.
Yeah, Mendoza is capable of making plays with his legs. Mendoza also, every once in a while, will take sacks that are like, you are way too experienced to be taking that sack. Who was it that just got, was it Wisconsin that just got him 5 times, I think, in a game? I mean, you should not be taking 5 sacks as an experienced quarterback like that. And really, not a lot of the pressure has come from that blind side. Carter Smith has really, we've watched, 4 games now, 5 games now, and I don't think I have written his name down once. And generally, when we're watching these games, you're only writing offensive linemen down for bad reasons. So I don't think we've really talked about him much, if at all, this week. So, I look at Indiana's tackles, and I think there's one that I feel like, I feel very good about his his potential to stand up and have a pretty good game. And the other side, Carter Smith, though, he's having, I think they feel pretty good about that side. If Ohio State's getting pressure off the blind side, that's when you do have Fernando Mendoza going, uh-oh. And because then it's on the blind side, and it's somewhere where he hasn't really had to be looking for pressure before. He hasn't had to deal with pressure for the blind side for the most part. Generally, it's been coming from the right side, which is the side he's generally facing as a right-handed quarterback. If you get him from behind at some point, that's when, oh boy, that's going to start speeding the clock up a little bit, because then you don't know. You might sort of be keeping, your peripheral vision down on the right side of the line. If you then have to worry about the left side of the line too, that really impacts stuff. I'm not expecting that. I think I'm expecting Carter Smith to hold up pretty well in this one. But yeah, the right side of the offensive line, again, monitor this space. Another one where, this is not a sides of the field thing necessarily. So it's kind of D'Angelo Pons and Jamari Sharp and maybe Rylan Gandy, these outside corners for Indiana against Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith. If those guys can hold up in one-on-one coverage, then that would be enormous for Indiana. If those guys can hold up in one-on-one coverage, they're going to go about 4 rounds in the draft earlier than I expect them to. So, that would be a real, real big deal if they can sort of hold up for Indiana. But I suspect that this is going to be Indiana's defense is going to have to win up front. Indiana's defense is going to have to win with the pass rush, because I don't think they have the luxury of keeping both safeties back and playing, just try and bracket both receivers. And because then Ohio State probably is going to be able to run the ball. And I don't, if Ohio State can run the ball, that's a big problem for Indiana. So I think they're going to have to try and win those, one-on-one, or at least sort of 1.5-on-1, or you've got a safety on one side, but not on the other side. And you hope you kind of guess right. But those matchups, if Ohio State's wide receivers dominate those matchups, Indiana's offense is not going to be able to score enough points to win this game. So they've got to really kind of hold up and at least try and play it to a stalemate for at least a good chunk of the day.
Right along with that, I would throw in nickelback Devin Boykin when Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate motion into the slot. What are they doing there? Because now if it's your nickel against one of those 2 guys, or safety against one of those 2 guys, it's your 3rd or 4th or 5th best pass defender against one of the 2 best receivers in the nation. Let's say 2 of the 5 best receivers in the nation, basically. So that's an advantage for Ohio State. So they've got to be careful with those and try to not let that happen however they can. I don't know that I don't think you're going to follow anybody necessarily, because you're going to, D'Angelo Pons I don't think he's just going to go follow Jeremiah Smith, he's your boundary corner. He's going to stay there basically and do his job. And I still go back to the is it Brandon Ennis or no, it was Jermaine Matthews was asked who of the two receivers is more difficult to handle, Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate. He said, well, with Jeremiah, you're always going to have safety help. So he said Carnell Tate is more difficult because that's the guy you're going to be one-on-one with. So, how do they handle that? I mean, the safeties didn't do much against Michigan. The Michigan safeties didn't do much to limit the Ohio State offensive passing attack, and they tried to play some zone in there. You just use it against them, and you draw some stuff up. There are zone beaters, as we've seen, and I'll be interested to see how they handle the Ohio State receivers in that slot.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting matchup because even some of the safeties that we've seen in coverage for Indiana over the course of the season have not always been phenomenal. You'll have guys sort of get lost in space or get just not set with motion or sort of a tempo, and whatever it is, like you can Amari Farrell, number one, was the one who I think it was the Oregon game. I'm trying to remember which game it was where they got him. They hit him. They just ran tempo, and he was like out of position and just got lost in the backfield. And he's had interceptions this year, so it's not like the ball skills are terrible. But also, if you can take advantage of that, that's a really big deal. On the other side of the ball, I think the matchup of Ohio State's offensive line, and really in particular going up against Tyreek Tucker, the defensive tackle. He has 10 tackles for loss. Going up against Stephen Daly, the defensive tackle, he has 18 tackles for loss. He also has, he also will be impactful. He had a tipped pass that led to an interception at Oregon late in that game that was a really, really big play. If Ohio State's offensive line can hold up against some of the twists and the stunts that Indiana is going to be showing up front, and they can give Julian Sayin time, that's going to put Ohio State in a tremendous position to win this game because, all the stuff we just said about the secondary, if the pass rush is getting there, that completely, that can completely change that and negate some of that advantage for Ohio State. If the pass rush isn't getting there, and especially if they're bringing added guys and the pass rush isn't getting there, that's when you run into big problems. And, I wonder if like a little bit of a subset of this is Elijah Hardy or, Isaiah Jones, one of those guys from the Indiana linebacker core against like Bo Jackson or CJ Donaldson in terms of, hey, a linebacker's coming. Can you throw your body in front of him and not let him get to Julian Sayin? Because if the blitz pickup is pretty good from Ohio State, that's another thing that you're gonna see pressure from Indiana. And Elijah Hardy has a ton of, I think he leads the team in sacks actually this year. And we just saw Isaiah Jones have a sack. I think that was the Oregon game, had a really big sack in that game. They're going to bring those linebackers sometimes. If you can pick that up, that's where you have an opportunity to turn what Indiana is thinking as, hey, this might be a big negative play to get us off the field into, hey, this Ohio State offense turns us into a big positive play that also gets them off the field in a way that ends with kicking a PAT.
We've even seen Aiden Fisher line up at edge at times this year. But yeah, Elijah Hardy leads the team with 7 sacks. Isaiah Jones is third with 5, and then Aiden Fisher has 2.5. So they are aggressive with those guys. I feel like up front, Indiana definitely needs to win some of those one-on-one matchups with the defensive line and the offensive line, and then try to get an advantage where they can at the best of times for them to, whether it's a second down sack that turns into a 3rd and 15, and you're like, well, you've just saved the drive, that sort of thing, where it's well-timed plays that result in positive plays for Indiana's defense that make these third downs much more difficult for Ohio State to pick up. So it'll be interesting to see what they do on second down to create issues on third down for the Ohio State offense. How about IGB versus Elijah Surratt? 2 physical guys. The Elijah Surratt will line up on either side of the field at wide receiver. He'll be, whichever side. He doesn't just stick with one side. So, IGB will, when the Surratt is on the short side of the field, IGB will be there with him. Those are 2 physical guys, both 6'2", Both will push, shove and grab and do whatever they can to gain an advantage to a point. It's been a while since we've seen an offensive pass interference call against the Ohio State defensive backs. I don't know if we've seen one this year. We've seen a few defensive pass interference calls for the Buckeyes of late. Some of those, I think the one against Michigan and Andrew Marsh was a bad call. It was just the ref didn't have a great view of it. But also the ones where we've seen IGB called, he's grabbing the entire way and he's running, and he's, whether he's looking back or not, he's just got his hands on the receiver. And this is going to be an instance where Big Ten refs know all about him, and he's been relatively clean this year. But this is a matchup between two big physical guys that I'm looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, I do wonder how much of Davis and Ekmanosian's approach this week is they can't call them all. And, they tried last year. They did their very best to call them all last year. He has gotten that cleaned up a lot. He went from 15 or 16 penalties last year to 5 this year. So he has gotten substantially better. And I think he's sort of outgrown that reputation to at least some degree with officials. But yeah, that's going to be a really, really intriguing one. And some of that is going to be based on what can Indiana do in the run game, because so much of their offense is RPO based. And if they're not running the ball, then Ohio State can just kind of shrug their shoulders and go, okay, go ahead. Run it if you want to, but you can't run it. So we know you're going to throw it. And that then opens up a bunch of stuff where this is not obviously going to be just purely mano-a-mano all day long, all night long. But yeah, when those two are matched up against each other, yeah, that's going to be a very physical. You will have some grabbing and shoving and stuff, I'm sure, after plays, because these are two guys who are both, pretty big, pretty physical guys who are used to sort of getting their way. So I would expect that to be a physical and very, very entertaining matchup. Do you have any more? I think have we hit 5?
So there's some of the key matchups that will go into deciding this game. Tom, let's go ahead and throw our score predictions out there. I am going with Ohio State 31-20. As I've done maybe the last 6 or 7 weeks, I take a touchdown off the board for Ohio State, and then it looks, boy, that looks a little too close. But I think the way Indiana runs, the way Ohio State will stop the run and force Indiana to find other ways to score, I think 20 is about the upper limit of points I'm willing to give an opponent at this point, even knowing this is the best offense Ohio State has seen all season long. And in terms of the defense, Ohio State's, in terms of Indiana's defense, Ohio State, I still feel like can move the ball enough, can throw the ball enough, and will hit a couple of home runs that will always buoy them against their opponent.
Yeah, this is one where if both teams play their B+ game, Ohio State wins. If both teams play their A- game, Ohio State wins. If both teams play their C- game, Ohio State wins. It's just kind of, Indiana really has to kind of outplay Ohio State. And it's certainly possible that they will. This is probably, this is a big game for Ohio State. It's a bigger game for Indiana. And Indiana's going to have a probably significantly pro-Indiana crowd in the building. So there's a lot of little stuff that sort of is going to be going in their favor. I went 27-17 Ohio State. And, I know there was another Caleb Down podcast this week where I think his brother picked the opponent to score 17 points, and he kind of gave him side eye, which is exactly what he did last week when his brother picked Michigan, I think, to score 17. And obviously Michigan scored at 9. This is the best offense Ohio State has faced, I think, by far this year. And no one has scored 17 against Ohio State. So I think Indiana fans are going to go, only 17 points. It's again, no one has done that yet this year. So that's not, that is not shade against Indiana. It just feels like this is a game where Ohio State's going to just be a little bit better in several areas where it just sort of adds up. And this is not going to be a game that is over at halftime. This is probably not going to be a game that's over at this end of the third quarter. But it's going to be a game where I'm expecting Ohio State to just be able to keep Indiana at arm's reach just long enough. And, you have one more interception from Fernando Mendoza, and maybe Ohio State wins by 17. You have one more interception by Julian Sain, and maybe this is a 3-point game late. But, it feels like just on a pure talent basis, Ohio State is probably about a touchdown or a little more than that better than Indiana. And I know the advanced stat metrics don't have it, they have it a lot closer than that. Indiana just, Indiana has been perfectly willing to keep the pedal down as long as possible and run up some real impressive stats. And Ohio State has just done what has sort of been necessary to win by 3 touchdowns every week. And I think that sort of skews those a little bit. But, in a matchup where Ohio State does need to do a little more, I think Ohio State has, to quote Brian Day, has a little more nitrous in that tank.
Yeah, Ohio State's not trying to win the county fair with the Garden. They're just trying to feed the family. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
So that will do it from here. If you would go ahead and if you're watching on YouTube, we'd appreciate the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell to be notified. You guys know we're going to be dropping a bunch of post-game stuff as we get closer to this. As we get past this game, we will have, of course, a long live show for all of your listening and viewing pleasure and needs. And, of course, if you do just listen, go ahead and hit the 5-star rating and review on all of your podcast platforms of choice. And you can continue to find us at the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Listen, sign up, say hello to us there on the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus. Would love to see you there. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all later.